inclusive education, the speakers for which are Mr. Avdesh Dixit, CHRO at Equity Knowledge Partners and also the moderator of the session, Kiran DM, CEO, ONGC Foundation, Anil Kumar Reddy, CEO and co-founder, Donate Cart, Gagandeep Bhullar, founder and CEO at Superhuman Race, Arun Singh Panwar, CEO at Ekta Shakti Foundation. May I please invite Dr. Urushi Makkar, Director at IMS Ghaziabad, to please join us on the stage. I now hand over the stage to Gagandeep Bhullar ma'am to take this session ahead.
Thanks, Lakshita. So we are going to be discussing inclusive education today. I think we are all from those fortunate groups of society that have had access to education. So it seemed like something that is automatic, normal for most of us. But there are some staggering numbers worldwide which reveal that there's a lot of disparity in access to education, and the inclusivity actually has an economic effect, right? So even if you look at just the gender equation or just disability, there would be some staggering numbers worldwide. There were 32 million disabled children as of last year who did not have access to any schooling whatsoever. I cannot imagine that the situation got better after COVID. It may have only worsened. In India, we've had 100% enrollment for women at the primary level of education, but only 25% continue to get higher education. But it actually gets worse after they get higher education. So as a result of the way that our society is laid out, 97% of the women in the country actually are in informal jobs. So out of the total labor participation that we have in country, which is, by the way, lower than Bangladesh and Pakistan. So India actually is 113th out of 152 countries in terms of gender parity as far as education and labor participation is concerned. And there is an inverse correlation between the level of education that a woman achieves and her participation in the labor force in India. So if you know somebody who is a PhD, who has a doctoral degree, there's a very good chance that she's not working today. In fact, her counterpart who comes from a village in India, who has received no formal education whatsoever, has a much greater likelihood of being gainfully employed. But the problem is that if you're not receiving STEM education, or if you're not receiving any education altogether, you actually have a huge gender pay gap. And that pay gap, in fact, globally is also astounding. So if I was to share the average numbers that we see as a result of the gender pay gap, I think you would actually take a moment to just be aghast. Globally, between men and women, there is a 20% wage premium that men enjoy. What this results in is that an average man anywhere in the world will earn $1 million more than the average woman over the course of his employment. That is have you seen $1 million? I've never seen $1 million. That's the level of the parity that we see in the world today, right? It's dismal. So I'm actually very excited. We have a great group of speakers today. We have representation from PSU, from the corporate sector, from startups, and from academia. And I'm as excited as you are to learn from all of our speakers and to see, how we can firstly understand the problem and secondly address the problem, because the problem is real. Education is not inclusive, and it has a direct correlation with not just the livelihood and income that you generate within your household, but also the GDP that our countries are able to generate and sustain over time. So I think, firstly, I'm going to ask my very esteemed panelist here, I'm going to ask Mr. Arun to talk a little bit about, what are the disparities that you see within this space? Are you seeing exactly as we were talking about with gender and disability, is there a problem in terms of access to education? And how deep is the problem? How far does it go?
Thank you, Gagan. Gagandeep, sorry. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Before starting, let me share some facts and figures. As per 2011, the literacy rate is 74.04%. Decadal increase was 9.2%. And out of that, male and female, if we see, uh, male is 82.14%, female is 65.46. So there is a gender gap of 16.68%. And as per 2015 data, India is lagging behind the world literacy rate by literacy rate of 86.3, and we stand 74.04. So lot has been done uh, in the education system. Whether it's the primary education or secondary education or higher education. Regarding the accessibility, yes, of course, there are a lot of gaps, and there are vulnerable, means the disadvantages groups. These disadvantages groups basically are like gender identities, socio-economic identities, geographical identities, disabilities, vulnerable groups. If I talk about gender identity means female, the transgenders. If I talk about socio-economic identities, SC, STs, OBC, minorities, geographical identities like villages, the children residing in small villages or maybe small towns, or the aspirational districts where they don't have that kind of facilities or the infrastructure. Uh, yes, of course, disability is a very big subject. If I talk about disability, 2.21% of the population in India falls under this category. And the children from 0 to 6 years of age is 7.8 million out of total 26.8 million. So the number is huge. And the current education infrastructure has only not more than 5% of the schools are having the infrastructure required for education for the children with disability. So there are huge gaps, whether it is a girl child or the disabled population or the vulnerable population. There is a huge disparity. So, and yes, of course, NEP 2020, if I talk about NEP 2020, they had tried to include all the entities, whether it's the gender identity, is socio-economical disadvantage category, or girl child. It's yes, they have tried to include everything, but it's not on ground right as of now. It's in plan. If I talk about specifically the gender entity, everyone knows Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao. As per 2000 economic survey, 2018 economic survey, this scheme was a huge success. And because of that, a lot of girls came forward, and the results has shown that a lot of girls came forward and their families supported them. Regarding Disability, yes, there's a big challenge because the infrastructure is not ready. Right to Education Act says that everyone should get a chance to get a formal, means the kind of formal education, but disabled children, the children with disability lacks because of lot of issues. It is the support by the families. It is the stigma attached to this segment. The kind of infrastructure required for children is not there. Like simple, the ramps are not there. The toilets, it's not available. So all these things has been tried, tried including this NEP 2020, National Education Policy. Regarding accessibility, yes, of course, the plan has been there for defining the special education zones in different aspirational districts. The plus, yes, of course, there is one big challenge which is building free boarding facilities is also is a challenge. Means the people from the low income group, they don't have that kind of capacity to get into or sustain themselves while studying. So and of course, the community participation, the awareness level. So there are several challenges which there are several challenges which we need to take forward on that. The kind of infrastructure, the kind of pedagogy, the kind of community participation. So there are several challenges which we need to come out of. Though the plan is there, but yes, still a lot of things needs to be done in that.
No, this
Thank
is
you.
fantastic. Thank you, Arun. I think this is exactly right. Our disabled and women, not just in India, but nearly everywhere in the world, there is a lack of access. And he's right, if these challenges are resolved, there's a great opportunity at the end of the tunnel. So if you look at the total disabled population across the world, about 1 billion people, and $1.2 trillion is the disposable income that they are able to generate. So look at what this is doing to the global economy. Similarly, you talked about safe schools, which is something that SDG 4 is building on. There is a specified now requirement, not just in terms of India's education policy, but also in terms of where we need to be by 2030, in terms of what our schools need to look like, for quality of education, for proficiency that children need to achieve, and in terms of, inclusive infrastructure. And I think, like you said, even though it is planned, I don't think we are there, especially within the rural setup. And then lastly, you touched upon the topic of women in rural India and how the community mindset needs to change. I think even if you look at countries other than India, I was reading a report a few months ago, and in Africa, I read that women spend 40 million hours getting water for the family every year. 40 million hours. These could be girls that have to go to school. These could be mothers who have just delivered babies. So this is a ridiculous number of hours that you're spending on just getting water, which is a basic need. So clearly the infrastructure need is real and communities need to change their mindsets. Thank you so much. So this actually creates a perfect segue, because women getting water by traveling such a distance and spending so many hours is not sustainable. So Anil, I would like to ask you, what do you think about the quality of education that is administered in India today? Do you think that there is a focus on the climate crisis, on sustainability? Do you see that? And if you're not seeing it, then how do you think that we need to sort of start thinking about this problem afresh and addressing it?
Yeah. Firstly, thank you, Social Story, for having me here. So before coming to the point, I'll talk about DonateCard, what we do. So I'm the founder of a platform called donatecard.com. We are an online donation platform where we are trying to bring transparency in charities. On our website, you get to fulfill needs of NGOs by paying money for whatever supplies that they are in need of. You can donate adult diapers to elderly people by giving money. You can donate sanitary napkins to women. You can donate notebooks to children. So all kinds of causes. In the last 1 year, we have raised 50 crore worth of donations on the platform from 5 lakh plus donors. More than what we do on DonateCard, I am personally very passionate about sustainability and climate change, because all the causes that we are working today are the current problems, right? But if you look back and see why are these problems created at the first place, I would think that this is because of the previous generation's mistakes, right? Whatever, let's say they have not used water properly. That's why we are facing problems about water. So the same way, I genuinely believe if we don't act about the current crisis, which is global warming or any of these crises that are there, the future generations are going to blame us for whatever acts that we have done, right? Because every single action that we are doing is impacting environment in one or the other way. So the core, I would say, the question shouldn't be, should we teach it in the school or should we teach it in the college? The question should have been, I mean, when should we should have thought about it, right? I mean, I think this should have thought at the first day of school, right? Whenever you go to a school, this should be the first thing that you should be taught, because you're doing it for the collective society, right? Many actions that you can think of. I mean, buying a sustainable product, it always comes back to the cost. I mean, if you teach a kid to save money, they would definitely go to a non-sustainable product. But if you teach them this is going to help the environment, this is going to help the whole society, then they would make decisions based on that. Especially if you'll ask me about DonateCard, the kind of causes people give, right? The reason why people give on our platform is because there is empathy in them. They want to support someone who is hungry today. They don't want someone to sleep hungry tonight. That's why they are donating, right? Similarly, they should, I mean, I'm really looking at from the future generations, because these are the people who would donate in future, right? Who would support causes in the future. If they don't know the real need to support environment, to support causes that are related to climate change, I don't think so we can create better societies for future. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Fantastic, Anil. So actually, Anil touched upon, I think, two very important points. One is that, I think we may already be late in beginning to think about sustainability, but also the fact that, wastage is linked to carbon emissions. And so there is a direct correlation with teaching our children about wastage or consumption, right? And that is, I think, what schools are able to do even today. Because, believe it or not, 2019 was actually the year where our energy consumption demand was highest across the world. And we ended up generating carbon emissions which were 1.7%, which is a high in terms of, how we were tracking in terms of targets. And we need to limit this, right? And what is linked to that is actually something very, very interesting. So what is linked to that is we today don't have renewable power to the same extent that we require it. So 70% of this growing demand is still being fulfilled through fossil fuels, right? So teaching our kids that they need to be smarter consumers than we have been. We have been thinking about cost, but they need to think about cost to climate. So even just the kitchen waste that we generate, 8 to 10% of global carbon emissions come from the kitchen waste that is generated across households across the world, right? That's a big number. Imagine if you stop wasting food in your kitchen today, which is something that you control and your child does not have to learn in school, you could be contributing directly to making the planet greener and healthier. So thank you, Anil. I think this was very insightful, and thanks for sharing your thoughts on this topic. So next I'll go to Urvashi. Thanks for joining us today. So Urvashi, actually I have a very interesting question that links to what you asked to the previous panel. And so, trying to understand here that, as we looked at the disparity in access and then sustainability, what do you think is happening in terms of preparedness for employment? So do you think that our education system today prepares people, gives them the right and relevant skills to find employment or decent work or even opportunities for entrepreneurship? Or do you think there is work that needs to be done in that regard?
So, well, thank you very much, Gagan, and I'm happy that you asked this question because undoubtedly being a part of the academic fraternity has given certain insights in last 2 decades. And I must say that the education system of India has been transforming. I should not say, in fact, transforming. It has been an incremental change in last 2.5 decades. But very, very strong ray of hope is there with the launch of NEP 2020. That is something which is unusual to observe in NEP, that after 40 years, we were following NPE, that was National Policy of Education, certain fundamentals and the principles which were redundant long ago, but we were just following them. So after 40 years, looking at the document of NEP 2020 has been a ray of hope, not only for our generation, but I'm very sure that for the coming generation of our country. And I feel really privileged that I belong to the current era of academic fraternity, which is witnessing the implementation of NEP 2020. And not only this, we will be in fact a party in the implementation of NEP also in the academic institutions. So when you have asked this question, which is so pertinent and so important for the sustainability of any country, which is so much pertinent for the nation building, that whether the institutions preparing the students for the future, whether the students are being given the skill sets required, whether the students are becoming employable or not, this is very, very valid question. And I'm very sure that I don't think that even I'm capable to answer this question, because being in this fraternity for the last 24 years has given us certain chaotic insights. I'll be very honest that the institutions are being guided by sometimes their individualistic guidelines, their individualistic visions and philosophies, which might not be aligned towards the greater cause of the nation building. And each institution will be having different agenda, each institution will be having entirely different curriculum pattern, which might be running into the silos. So the point is that the different institutions, we might be having the category A or the category B, tier 1 or the tier 2 institutions in our country. The point over here is that we talk about industry-academia synergy. There is not even a synergy between the overall academic pattern and fabric of our country at all. There is so much of the differentiation and radical differentiation, I must say, between the institutions in terms of the curricula which is offered to the students, in terms of what is relevant to the corporate sector, what is really relevant to the whole country even. And I don't understand one thing, that why there is so much of the buzz about only the corporate sector preparedness for the students. Why can't we have the focus on the vocational trainings? Why cannot we make the significant importance creation of the vocational training in our country, which is being done in the countries like Germany today? So much of the importance, significance, respect and the status is correlated with the vocational trainings in the European countries today, that being a boutique owner, being a barber is a pride over there. But in our country, the parents would comment to the kids during the childhood that if you will not study, you will become an electrician tomorrow. And being an electrician is one of the highest paid vocational occupation in the European countries. So the point is that not only preparing the students for the corporate sector, it is really important to widen the vistas it is important to widen the scope of the vocational training and corporate readiness, and to synergize the curricula in such a manner that the whole country is aligning their efforts, their resources in certain directions which can look into the nation building per se. So here I have certain points to make, 1, 2, 3, not more than that. I'll take 3 more minutes. One very important point is that there is no definition of the relevant skill today, because the change and the transformation of the skills are happening so frequently, and the skill sets are becoming so disruptive, and the timeline is becoming so much short that today we are acquiring a skill and it is becoming redundant and irrelevant the very next moment. And COVID has given us this realization very well. The ripple effects of COVID on the education system are very much visible. I'm sure all of us will agree that how quickly we have tried to adopt to the online model of teaching learning processes. But again, I'll be honest enough to confess that that online teaching learning model has not been very, very effective. I must share one example that I asked. Few students are sitting here from my campus, even IMS Ghaziabad. I asked the students, that tell us honestly, that did you really enjoy the online model of teaching? Did you really were not doing these two things, that switching off your videos and putting your mobiles or the laptops into the mute and just logging in and not even getting the real learning which was expected out of the whole process? And they agreed that yes, it happened, and now coming to the campuses in the offline model has given them so much of the learning in very short duration in last 1 month itself. So the point over here is that aren't we adding some additional glamour and sheen to the online education unnecessarily? We have to ask ourselves. And if we are adding it, because we cannot deny the significance and exploration of the EdTech, which can contribute to the future of the country, undoubtedly, but with the quality, but with the resources, but with the training only, but with the serious kind of the correlation which is established between the pedagogical tools which have been adopted by the teaching fraternity during this online model. That's what is really important. And just presuming that within overnight the whole teaching fraternity of the country would be having the flexibility, agility and efficacy to adapt the online model and to deliver with the similar effectiveness is asking something high. I'm very sure in the last 1 year is asking too much. So I'm very sure that this online model has not been that successful, that has been, I'm sure, propagated. So the points over here comes that we have to focus on the skills and competencies, but unnecessarily if will be giving the emphasis on certain technical skills, sometimes it can backfire on the educational institutions, because the technical skills shelf life is very less. It has to be the focus on the emotional quotient of the students. It has to be the focus on their aptitude and the attitude. It has to be on the focus on their learning zeal. Unless until that learning potential is fully untapped in the institutions, and that ecosystem is not created within the organizations, I believe that we are creating a generation of redundant skilled people who might lose the skill within few years after entering into the corporate sector, and they will be losing the jobs, as has happened in the last 8 months, that 400 million jobs have been lost because those 400 million could not upgrade themselves. They could not upskill themselves. So today is a scenario in which we are living. We have to keep on unlearning, relearning, and then keep on doing this cycle again and again. And I'm sure that if we can prepare the students for this scenario, that is more important. Giving certain skill sets is definitely important to prepare for the short term. That is going to be a micro perspective, but preparing the students for the lifetime career, it is important to give them the aptitude and the attitude of learning and relearning again and again. That's what is my few cents on this issue.
Thank you, Urvashi. That was brilliant. Thank you. So I think there's nothing more to add to what you've said, Urvashi. This is very well put together. Definitely a focus on vocational skills. I remember having paid $150 an hour for a plumber in the United States. I cannot imagine any of us shelling out that kind of money in India. So you're very
I
right.
would be adding one point, Gagan, I just
Sure.
forgot to share. I was just noting down few statistics, and I'm sure all of us know these statistics, but obviously with the perspective of the point which I was sharing with you, it was such a shock to see that in the recent past, very recently, 93,000 candidates appeared in UP police for the job position of a peon. And just imagine that out of those 93,000 candidates, 3,700 were PhD holders and 23,000 were postgraduates. So if this is the scenario, it is definitely an unfortunate scenario, and I'm sure that we should not create a bigger picture out of one instance in our country, but it is definitely reflective of the system, that what type of employment generation we are going to do in our country and what type of education we are providing. So the question over here is not to create inclusive education. The question over here is not to create the educated generation. The question here is to create employable, skilled, and ready to adapt generation which can adapt to the changes which are going to happen definitely in the coming few years again and again.
And as the government has said, I think there's also a greater need for our people to become Atmanirbhar, for somebody to post a job and for you to apply to it while you're a PhD and applying for a peon's role, I think is a very dire situation. So we need more entrepreneurs, original thinkers, skilled technicians. We need all of that in the country today. So thank you, Urvashi. And now last but definitely not the least, so Kiran, I have a question for you because ONGC does so much in terms of CSR, and I think that there is obviously a need to spend money to solve the problem. There was a McKinsey report that came out, I think, a year or two ago, which talked about the fact that India could realize a $770 billion GDP opportunity year on year if we brought more women into the labor force. But the cost to do that is an investment of $279 billion. So there is definitely an investment that is required, and I think it can only come through social giving and CSR. So just wondering what your thoughts are. What is the role that CSR plays in education, inclusive education?
Yeah, thank you, Gagan, and good afternoon. It was interesting to listen to the various speakers talking from their experiences from their domains. I would share with you a few stories of how CSR has been working towards inclusion. And if you look at in the last 6 years of CSR's prescription, that is about almost 1,20,000 crores, which is a huge amount in the last 6 years. I'm not counting this financial year. And out of that, about 34% CSR spend is spent on education, which is again a huge lay. The unfortunate thing is most of these CSR spend happens in urban cities because of the guideline of the Act. And there are instances where a school in Delhi or a Noida gets multiple school kits because some CSR has to spend. So these kind of things are happening, which we need to see how do we correct it. Getting access to school is a very important issue for many children staying in rural India. And it's not so easy like what we see in urbanized. I think many of us who have come from village background will understand that. Children even today travel almost 5 kilometers to 6 kilometers walking or having multiple transports to reach to the school. With all that, like Anil shared, 82% people are getting enrolled is a big boost, I could say a positive stroke. But then at a primary level, you have 4.2% dropout. And at a upper primary level, you have 4.8% dropout. At a secondary level, you have 17% dropout. And when we look at these percentages, it's all very small, 4.2%. What does it make? But you should, the percentage is at what? It is 25 crore. So when you compare the overall dropout of a school children dropping out is about 12% of 25 crores, which is more than around 3 crores. Look at the impact the 3 crore children are going to have. Numbers is always fine, but when you look at from a person, 3 crore children, it's going to be a big impact. What we have been doing is, I'll give you one example what CSR can do. Paintala village in Sitapur district of Uttar Pradesh. It's a remote village in heartland of Hindi-speaking population. We started a CBSE school about 6 years back. Today there are 1,400 children, and they are par with any other children from Delhi. They all come from 38 surrounding villages. 6 years back, when the students joined, who were studying in 4th standard, 5th standard, they were studying state syllabus, Hindi medium. Today they are conversant in English. And when we first, the school went to the board exams of 10th, that was 2 years back, one of the child scored the second highest in the entire state of UP. So this is what CSR can do. For me, this is inclusive. Yes, because you are creating a school not in a place where there are plenty of schools, but you are going to the place where it is required. We also support organization like Ekal Vidyalaya, which has more than 1 lakh schools, informal schools, at places where there are no schools. Even getting a teacher there is a tough. So the local person is trained to teach, and it is a learning ecosystem that is created. It is not per se school. It is an ecosystem. At least children will come, sit in a place, and there is a peer learning that happens. So we have supported these kind of organizations. We work with them closely. When I was talking about dropouts, 62% of the tribal population which goes to school, they drop out. And at very young age. The reason is, we have more than 120 languages. When a tribal child goes to a local school, government school, I'll share an example that happened when I visited Araku Valley. It is in Visakhapatnam district. Visakhapatnam is an urban, you have so many PSUs and even IT companies and all that. But about 70 kilometers or 80 kilometers from there, you find this tribal area where, it's a proper tribal villages. When the children go to school there, the medium of instruction is Telugu, which is obvious because that is the state language. But the children who come from the tribal, they don't speak Telugu. So they don't understand what teacher is trying to teach. And the teacher, because of the transfers and other things, what keeps happening, doesn't know the tribal language or accent. So children go to school because of midday meal scheme, stay for some time, sleep, and after a couple of years, they drop out. There is an organization called Peace Foundation there. We worked with them. They created a learning curriculum for Anganwadi children. And we also said very clearly, don't create alternate systems. We have to work with the systems which are already in place. So we supported them, and they are working in about 120 villages where the children are taught Telugu with songs, dance, and rhymes, and it is play. When you visit those centers, you will see the children with so much of energy. And they slowly are learning Telugu there. So when they come to school, that acclimatization for the language is already there. So for me, this is inclusion of education, because otherwise these people are going to be dropout. We heard again Anil and talking about statistics about gender gap. And again, if you look at adolescent age is the time where most of the girls drop down. The reason all of us understand, the fear of menstruation, toilets being not available. So we work with organization which goes to schools and not only gives awareness of menstrual hygiene for the children, but also involves the parents. The session happens with the mother. Because majority of the time, it's the mother who will say, don't go to school. So this kind of interventions we are seeing, so that, and in a course of 4 or 5 years, we have seen the drop rate has come down in those areas where we are doing the intervention. And as part of a PSU, we have been working and funding on toilet construction and Swachh Bharat in a huge way. I think more than 1,000 crores we have spent in the last 4 years. Swachh Vidyalaya Abhiyan we have been doing in 9,000 schools in 11 states. We have constructed toilets during that Abhiyan. So all this is, if you look at, this is what CSR can do if you look at it from a real focus and a strategy, things can change. Now, many of us, there is another organization called Tapas. This has 2 branches, one in Karnataka and one in Odisha. What they do is they conduct an examination after 10th for people who are BPL called older children. They select 2 children from every district, and then they take them to a particular place, residential school, where they do +1, +2 combined with IIT coaching, taking on the Super 30 Anand concept. And believe me, in last 6 years, there are more than 400 children who have gone to IIT from this particular organization's intervention. Now, when the children came to the write the entrance test, when we asked them, do you know what is IIT or NIT? Majority said they don't understand what it is. These are the kind of children who actually came to take test. The 2 years of coaching, the 2 years of grooming makes them the different personality altogether. So, I mean, I can give these kind of n number of examples on how inclusive thing can happen. We also run a scholarship for ST, SC and OBC and general category. Almost about 22 crores we spend every year on scholarship disbursement. Even today, when we do that, the policy is 50% or more should be for women, girls. But we are not able to fulfill in majority case because we will not get applications. So there are issues. Now we are trying to see how we'll do the intervention so that this scheme gets also the support. At the same time, we are looking at more women being participative in things. So, but organizations which are looking CSR as a transformation organs are the organizations which can really work with strategy. Otherwise, it's going to be check writing institutions. They just write a check, give it to somebody and go. So it is not whether CSR can do. CSR can definitely look at bringing in a change and inclusiveness, not only in education but in so many other things. Hedeldi is another organization we partner with, and their major competences, they go to places where children have dropped out in second standard, first standard. The initial, their group, they started identifying children who have not gone to school, but who are about 14, 15, 16 years. They picked up a batch of 60 people, made them trained them as call center executives. After 6 months, you can go to YouTube and see the stories, the change of, the transformation that has happened. So we work with these kind of organizations so that you lost an opportunity to study, but you don't have to lose an opportunity to get employed. So, and these trainees, one other add-on which we, with our intervention which is happening is, we ask these trainees who are getting trained in the skill to go to schools and talk about their life and tell why dropping out is not a good idea. A person who is 17, 18 years goes to a school child, 14 years, 12 years, the connect is much better. If I go and talk, I'll not get that connect. But a child goes and talk, the connect is much better. So we are trying to do these kind of experiments to see how this can be avoided, the dropout. So I think I can keep talking, but I think I'll end it now.
This was brilliant. Thanks, Kiran. I think you've touched upon so many of the topics of inclusion that we forget. So I think gender disparity and disability, they get a lot of attention, but the socio-economic and geographic barriers to access are equally important. And just the scale of work that you've described and the impact that it has had on local communities, that's very impressive. Thank you for sharing those stories. I was very engrossed in the very interesting stories. Okay, so we'll quickly take maybe a question or two from the audience. Oh wow, so many hands are up already. Fantastic.
Good afternoon to all of you. Myself, Dr. Vijay Kumar Salvi. My question as ONGC Foundation has talked about the funding, similarly donation, and here about the technical and vocational education. You are asking about the weaker sections and women's. Actually, what in a COVID, since last 1 year, if we see, in an education system and also in our adoption of life, whatever lifestyle, we are again converting to the Vedic lifestyle. And that Vedic lifestyle in Vedic education. In last since 20 years, I am hearing about that. Our education system should be this, should be this, should be. Now here the youngsters, businessmen, youngsters, vice chancellor, youngsters, chancellor of the university has established. Now this COVID again. We can say the learn us ki now we have to turn up to the Vedic education. So why it is not we can start a collaboration just from this we should start. The question to you are also that we should make a foundation for that. For the Vedic educations, where if we see the 64 kalas of the Krishna, it also includes the aeronautical engineering, it also includes the architecture, it also includes the Ayurveda and all these things. Okay, and since last 500 years, it will be lost. So before 500 or 1000 years, the Vedic education was the good, and now again we are only talking about such type of education in the another form, another language. So why should we are not capable to such establishment of such type of sustainable education plus sustainable opportunity of jobs and sustainable life with respect to that natural.
Right. Thanks, Dr. Vijay. I think yes. Please, Kiran, take the question.
It's a good question, and I would like to share that there is an organization called Shiv Ganga in Madhya Pradesh, which works with the tribal thing, and we have been discussing with them, and I think in the next few couple of months we'll be launching a program called Village as a Gurukul. So what we are trying to do there is we are trying to look at there are a lot of trades which are available as trades in in village. So that the students who are studying there will be a formal school and things, but every artisan will become a guru. So it's a walking kind of a thing. You walk in a village, you talk to anybody, there is a lot of learning. So we are trying to create this model of village as a Gurukul. We want to experiment in a couple of villages and then see how it can be scaled up.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kiran. Urvashi, do you have any thoughts on this? Because you're from academia. So any role that Vedic education can play to supplement modern education or supplant it?
I think it is all about the ecosystem. And sometimes we might be having in silos few institutions working excellently, but how they are going to be imbibed in the environment once they'll be out of those schools or institutions. That is a challenge. So I'm very sure that we have to create a seamless, you can say, flow in our country, and it might take so many years or few years or sometimes no time at all. It depends on the will to change. And I would be honest, I don't think there is a will at the moment. There are only few dedicated ones who might be putting out of 130 crores. So that's why I think we should be able to accept and admit that where we stand. And these formal platforms should give us the opportunity to be honest. I have seen in most of the workshops, plenary talks, conferences, seminars, people just glamorizing a drop equivalent to the ocean and nothing coming out. So I'm happy that this question has been asked, but I'm sorry to say that there are not many examples we can relate today. Of course, the example cited by Mr. Kiran is a relevant one, but I'm just thinking about the challenge those students might face in getting absorbed in the corporate sector tomorrow. Because corporate sector, the employability, the employment, you can say market has to have the absorption capability and the potential also, isn't it? And there has to be uniformity of education. Within the different segments, we have to have the uniformity of curricula, we have to have uniformity of teaching, learning processes, pedagogical tools, and their acceptance, not only to the national, but to the global perspective also.
Yeah, one
Just like
very
to add,
quick fundamental points I have in my mind. My sincere compliments to all the panelists for bringing many deliberations on inclusive education, but still, a very fundamental question is going on in my mind. What are the real hindrances of this real inclusive education? Is it the disparities of gender, disabilities, incomes, or the disparities in skills and competencies, or it is the mindset? I just wanted to know, what is the real culprit behind the inclusive
Thank you.
education?
So I think, Kiran, you were beginning to say something. If you
I'll just add on to the previous thing. See, there are more than 6,000 Gurukuls is already functioning from various organizations. And children also spend about 12 to 15 years in studying the Vedic learnings. But today the irony is there is no equivalence between that and the formal framework what we have. And many a time when these Gurukul children are studying the Vedic, they are also reading the other texts and curriculum. Except for that non-formal certification where they can go through, there is a lot of talks going on, and the new education policy is also talking about how do we create a framework for this. So I think hopefully once that happens, then the seamless movement and acceptability of those 6,000 institute children who are from Vedic background to other section will happen faster.
Thank
Sir,
you, Kiran.
yeah, for your question, my thought is that it's the inclusiveness is I would say a mindset problem and not the issue of anything else.
Great. So with this, I think we are going to have to wrap up. We've already exceeded our time, but thank you for listening intently. Thank you to my fellow panelists for providing such great insights. And I think we should not, like you said, Urvashi, end the conversation here. This conversation must continue. We must take ownership of making education inclusive to the extent possible. So thank you very much. Talking about this.
Ma'am, especially I would like to give thanks to all panelists, and in a short, I would like to remark to Government of India on behalf of you. Yeah, in one line. So in CSR, monitoring and implementation, there is need of the hour because we discuss about talking for implementation of CSR, but there is no discussion about CSR monitoring and evaluation in a credible manner. So I want to just give my voice to Government of India on behalf of all of you scholastic personality here, that one national CSR monitoring application should be launched from the Government of India, and it should be as a policy making advice, should go from as a unity from all of you. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. May I now request Mr. Manoj Pachori, co-founder, SocioStory, to please come up on the stage to give away the citation to our speakers. Dr. Urvashi Makkar, Director at IMS Ghaziabad. Kiran DM, CEO, ONGC Foundation. Anil Kumar Reddy, CEO and co-founder, Donate Card. Gagandeep Bhullar, founder and CEO at Superhuman Race. Thank you, Manoj sir. May I now request Dr. Pareen Somani, independent academic scholar and motivational speaker, to please come up on the stage and give the citation to the speakers. Arun Singh Panwar, CEO at Ekta Shakti Foundation. Thank you, ma'am. May I now request everyone to please gather for a group photograph? Mr. Manoj Pachori, could you please join us back on the stage for the group photograph? Thank you so much, everyone.